Hi, my name's Amy Aniobi, and I'm a writer-producer. I'm currently a co-executive producer on season 3 of Insecure. And before that, I worked on a show called Brothers in Atlanta at HBO, and also Silicon Valley season 2, and the Michael J. Fox Show, and Trial and Error on NBC, and Awkward Black Girl. If you feel like you're interested in writing and maybe are not quite like, should I take a class? There are so many books about writing out there. Like, I know for television, there's a book by Ellen Sandler called The TV Writer's Workbook, and it helps like break down how to write a spec script being like your own version of an existing TV show. And that was like essential to me. There's also, Pamela Douglas has a book called TV Drama that breaks down how to write a television drama script in 4 or 5 or 6 acts. And that was super helpful too. I did a lot. There are also like free resources, like even if you're like, I don't have $5 to cram together to buy a book, I just want to learn something. Literally, how do you write a screenplay? It's online. And then I just started reading all these sources and realizing that I needed a network. Like, it wasn't enough to be in like, you know, a closet reading stuff online and watching TV alone. Having a network of people around you is so much more helpful. But it doesn't mean that you have to have an MFA. Like, I always told my parents, like when I got my MFA, they're like, now when you get a sign-on bonus, and I was like, what? That's not a thing. It doesn't give you anything except like, all it does is make sure that you'll never be a doctor. This town, like Hollywood, is filled with way more people who don't have writing degrees, who are doing great. It's not like a prescribed thing, like go get a degree and then you become a writer. That's not a thing. It's really just write. If getting a degree helps you write more, great. If being in a writer's group helps you write more, great. If reading books online or websites or watching YouTube tutorials helps you write more, great. Just write. Sort of like a weird thing where it happens when it's supposed to happen. And I find that if you're actually looking for agents and looking for managers, very often you end up with what's kind of like a false positive. People who are looking for anyone find you because you're looking for anyone, and then sometimes it's not actually a match. To see that, like, if you're with people who understand what you're doing and want the same things as you, your peers, your truest friends, it is helpful because then you rise together. The way I think of agents and managers, because I've talked a little bit about like which one, what you need or what you have, I always think of it as an agent closes the deal for the job that you want or got, and a manager guides you to the relationships that get you the deal. A manager also manages your career, and an agent manages this contract. I think you are responsible for your work, as they say, like an agent takes 10% of your salary, so they do 10% of the work. Same thing for managers, either take 10 or 5. You're responsible for the writing. So anytime I've had a friend be like, I called my agent and was like, what were they doing for me? I'm like, you gotta give them a contract for them to do something for you. Like, you are responsible for your career. So it's kind of one of those things where you have to be doing the thing for people to give you the ability to do the thing. And I think representation isn't something that you should be running after, honestly. I think it should be something that is in the background. You need to be doing the work. Do the work, and eventually the reps will be calling you. I think one of the biggest things to look for is who else they represent. And do they represent people whose careers you want? I literally, like, when I was on Happy Endings, I was in a room of 16 writers. The day before I started the job, I looked up all the credits and I looked up who represented them. And it's literally as simple as, like, if you have something like IMDb Pro or Studio System, you can look it up like for real. But I was like literally like Jonathan Groff repped by into Google. It comes up. So you can do that with anyone. It's like rep by, blah, blah, blah. If they've ever been written about, somewhere it says who the repped are, or, you know, like agency, agent, whatever. And I looked up everyone and all the people, and also like movies that were coming out and TV shows I loved. I would watch the credits and write down the names of the writers, and I'd look up who repped them. And I realized like all the funniest people, all the people whose careers I wanted were repped at UTA. And I was like, oh, I want to be at UTA. There are a few rounds of staffing meetings that happen. The first round is called generals, and the second are called staffing meetings. Generals are when they're like the water bottle tour. You go to different production companies and studios and you just meet executives, usually junior executives to start out, or coordinators, which are the people who help the upper level executives. And they're really just like meet and greets. They're kind of like first dates. And they're very casual. You should just like dress nice, but dress like you. Don't wear a suit, because no one in Hollywood wears suits except agents. And you always take the water because you never know if your mouth is going to get dry. When you go, you are basically the number one question you'll get in a general is, so tell me about you. And your job is to tell your whole life story in like a minute. So we call that an elevator pitch. It's basically, the name is given from like if you had one ride in an elevator from the bottom floor to the top floor of a building. Talk about yourself, what would you say? So an example is, I'm always like, well, I'm from Dallas, Texas. I was raised in a very Nigerian home, so didn't own my first pair of cowboy boots until I got to college. And I basically decided very early that I wanted to disappoint my Nigerian parents by not becoming a doctor. Instead, I became a comedy writer. That's sort of my elevator pitch. And then you can elucidate from there, like where you went to school. Usually they'll prompt you with questions, but it really is just like talking about you and saying a little bit about yourself. Other common questions are, what type of shows, if it's for TV, what type of shows do you like to watch? What is your favorite show on television? What type of shows do you like to write? What kind of writer are you? Where are you from? Where do you get inspiration for your stories? Are you single? They don't ask that. After you've passed the generals round, basically once the lower level execs have agreed that you are worthy of meeting, you kind of go up to the staffing round, which is with like development execs and managers and sometimes even like VPs of comedy or drama based on your field. Another important thing to remember is if they do ask what type of writer you are, in television, it's actually pretty important to choose a side, comedy or drama, when you're starting out. Eventually you can write anything, but when you're starting, they very much like to put you in a box. So pick your side, and you can do it like I did, just literally look at the stuff you've written and the stuff you watch and say, that's what you do, and then continue to write that for the foreseeable future until you've gotten some traction in that field, and then you can move over to the other side. So once you start meeting with those execs, they'll be asking you, which of our shows do you like to watch? Which of our shows are your favorites? Which of our shows do you want to work on? That means not only what's currently on television, but also what's in development at their network, which are like pilot scripts, things that other people have read or written for them, maybe like some development projects. You can usually get those scripts by Googling or from getting them from like your reps. And then from there, if you pass that round of meetings, then you get producer meetings and showrunner meetings. That's when you're meeting with the show that you want to work on. So for instance, you go in for a meeting with the showrunner of Happy Endings, and he says, what's your favorite episode of this show? And you probably should have watched it and can talk about it at length. But again, it's just about being yourself, because really all of these meetings are people deciding, do I want to hang out in a room with you for 10 hours a day? Because that's really the job. Do you have a personality that makes me want to be around you or makes me not? If you have a great personality, you're at an advantage. If you don't, maybe work in features. As a writer in the room, your individual responsibility is to be positive, to be on time, and to always be listening. And if you're listening well, then you get to a place where you feel comfortable pitching. I think sometimes it's scary when you're new to pitch. I had someone say, if you do nothing else, ask someone how their day is going. And I literally, when I was a staff writer, was terrified every day that I was gonna lose my job. And I thought I was alone. There's this myth out there that there's this perfect staff writer who's killing it and is the funniest person in the room and gets all their pitches in. It's a myth. That person doesn't exist. So get that out of your head. Really, everyone is nervous when they're new. And I would say sometimes I'm like, today my goal is to make one person laugh. Today my goal is to make a joke about lunch. Today my goal, and it was like these little things that were so like, but I was just so scared, especially when you're at the bottom and I was the only Black person in my first room, one of not very many women. So it was just like hard. I think the first thing that I always do is go to my writers group first. I'll email my friends who I meet with and talk writing with and say, hey, so I had an idea for a show. What do you guys think about this? And because I like to get feedback from writers first. I think that writers like think about things differently than your reps do. Sometimes your reps think about if it's sellable, if it's marketable, whereas your writer friends will think about, is it right for you to write? You know, is it matching your voice? Is it something that they can see that you're passionate about? And I think that's very good barometer for whether or not you should develop it. Once I get kind of like the okay from my writers group, then I'll send a log line to my agents and say, hey, look, I had this idea for a show. It's a drama about like 2 women, like firefighters, whatever. And they'll say, well, you know, there's a female firefighter pitch that's happening as a spinoff of Burn Notice or whatever, you know, at FX. So that already exists, but what's your take? And then you're like, well, here's my version. And then if they like it, usually what they do is say, hey, this sounds really cool. Can you write like a 1-sheet pitch? Like, and it's not a fully fleshed out pitch. It's just sort of like why you care about this, who the main character would be, what is the show kind of like? And usually you do that like in 1 page, and then they'll use that to send to production companies, to maybe even like some execs and see if people are interested in it. I find that like you get to a certain level, I think, where sort of like you can be the one who brings it yourself to the studio or to the network and say, hey guys, I'd like to pitch you guys this thing directly just from me. But I think sometimes there's some value added in like getting to walk into the room with somebody else. So getting to have like a production company on your side is kind of cool. And so usually they'll send it to a production company and then you meet with them, you work out the pitch together, and then it becomes a fully fledged pitch. It goes from that 1-page version to like more of like a 6, 7, 8, maybe 10, 15-page version, which is covering every aspect of what the show would be. Why you, why now, what the show is about, what the logline is, who the main characters are, what's the style of the show, what's the tone of the show, what are we going to be seeing week to week, what's the breakdown of what the pilot is, like literally what's going to happen through the pilot, what are the act breaks, what are the things that make it sing, what are the things that make it different, and then wrapping up like why it means something to you and why it matters. And that sort of thing is usually like a 10 to 15, maybe sometimes even a 20-minute pitch, which is like long. It's a lot of talking. It's like more talking than I've done today. But like if you get that done and it's good, then you get to pitch a show and maybe even sell a show. One of the number 1 phrase that every writer should learn is, let me take a look at that. As opposed to fighting in the moment the note, as opposed to pushing back on people who are really there to help you, it's important to just be able to say, I need to step back. I'm feeling sensitive. They're talking about my main character who is based on me and this hurts. And so you can just say, good point, let me take a look at that. And then you get to go away and sit with your feelings and figure it out for yourself. It's also important to realize that very often, especially when you're getting notes from people who aren't writers, the note isn't the thing to listen to. There's something called the note behind the note, which is basically they might pitch you something that you're like, what? But really there's a note behind the note they're giving. So for instance, they might say, hey, you know, you have like your main character Jenna falling in love with Brandon on page 5. Is there something to be said for like, maybe Brandon is a woman? And you're like, oh, well, this is based on my first marriage and I didn't marry a woman. Why would they suddenly just pitch that Brandon is now a woman? But then you can think, maybe the note behind the note is that this isn't feeling special enough. Maybe the note behind the note is that this feels like something they've seen before. Maybe the note behind the note is that the person you've cast for the lead role to play you, feels like is an actor that they've worked with before who has expressed that they want to be in a relationship with a woman on screen. You never really know what the note behind the note is, but our job as writers is to find it. And very often execs will pitch things that might, at first blush, sound kind of crazy, but then there's a reason for it. So I think being able to realize that like their job is not to tear you down. There probably are some bad executives out there who don't care, but all the ones I've worked with, their job is to build you up. Their job is to support your vision, but no one is going to understand your vision as much as you do.